just read The Diamond Age, or A Young Lady's Illustrated Primer by Neal Stephenson. This is a reread. I read this book probably 10 years ago or so now, so I barely remember anything about it. But I picked it up again because of sort of current technological things, which I'll get into. So I've read a few different Neal Stephenson books. This is one of my favorite. I think it's the one that's won the most awards. It won I think the Nebula and the Locus Award, or maybe the Hugo and the Locus, nominated for the Nebula, something like that. But it won a lot of awards. Came out in 1995. And I would argue that, I guess I wouldn't argue. You had to define it. You could say it's cyberpunk, even though it's not cyberpunk, but there's kind of no other way to describe it that I can think of. But if you call it cyberpunk, it can give you an idea of what the story is about, or what the setting is like. So high-tech, low-life. Now, there's not much digital or hacking or network-related things that you might think of in terms of cyberpunk, but there is. We'll get into what it is. It takes place, I thought it said the mid-21st century, but at one point there is a date written in the book that seems to be in the 22nd century, but from sort of the timeline and their explanation of history, to me it has to be mid-21st century. And this is a post-nation state world, so that's why I sort of say it's cyberpunk, that we don't have our nation states or countries geographically split up throughout the world. We have instead these things called files, which is like the Greek word, like think of phylum, tribes or people, where people are split into different sort of ethno or religious groups, which are not bound to any geographic area. So the whole book takes place, well, I guess not the whole book, but for the most part it takes place in the Shanghai region. And in this sort of city of Shanghai, there are many different districts and different city blocks that are occupied by these different phyla, which are, or files I should say, which are distinct sovereign entities. And there's a bit of history in this book where they sort of say that this came about through something almost akin to cryptocurrency, where with the rise of the internet and stuff, people were able to exchange money without government oversight, and that sort of became the norm, so that government no longer had a way to tax because they couldn't track money, and so the whole systems of nation states fell apart because no one could tax anything, and that's what gave rise to this new world. And then there was something called the Common Economic Protocol, which was put in place, which is sort of not a governing body or anything like that, but sort of rules that all the different files follow, so that, and it's all about, it's economic. It's all about people's ability to produce or amass or hold wealth or property. The main file that this book sort of revolves around is that of the New Atlantean, or the Neo-Victorian. So they are a file that has sort of emerged from the Anglosphere, with the vestigial British monarchy as the head. So the current queen is Queen Victoria II. It's sort of, like I said, a Neo-Victorian age. They model themselves on the Victorians of the late 19th century in terms of morals, in terms of dress, in terms of etiquette. But this is a very technologically advanced world. So the sort of the big technological difference between us and them is that they have nanotechnology. They have the ability to create basically anything from individual atoms. So they have these things called matter compilers, which think of like a Star Trek replicator, except whereas the replicator turns energy into matter, these are being fed through these things called feeds, which feed them both the energy needed to do this process and also the raw materials, so the individual atoms themselves, that these matter compilers then sort of 3D print style create or build something. And it can be food, shelters, buildings, computer technologies, anything at all can be built from individual atoms. Now, this has also given rise to a sort of new sort of computing system, because they can build things on a molecular level. I believe all of their computers are sort of mechanical in that they're sort of rod based. I don't know enough about computer science to understand this, but from my understanding is they create these tiny mechanical computers that are sort of contained within these microscopic entities they call mites, and because of that, computer technology can be very compressed and very small. They can also create diamondoid structures because they can just build diamond from the raw carbon atoms. So that's why it's called the Diamond Age. They can also create buildings and have infrastructure that sort of doesn't defy the laws of physics, but it's not constrained by the building laws that we currently have. So structures can be much taller. They can even be floating. They travel via airship, similar to a sort of Belle Epoque era airships, because the airships, they don't contain hydrogen or helium. They contain vacuum, and they can contain vacuum because of the structural elements in the envelopes of the ships. They're strong enough to withstand the pressures of the atmosphere on this vacuum. But like I said, they can build sort of artificial islands and buildings, like almost like growing them, as long as they have this feed supplying them with the energy and the raw materials, the atoms. Energy is not really talked about, so I don't know what their energy system is based on. It doesn't seem to be a petroleum-based or an oil-based, fossil fuels-based system. But there's no mention of nuclear either, so who knows? Doesn't matter. So our story begins with this guy, Lord, what's his name? Alexander Chunsik Finkel McGraw, or something like that, who he's like Asian American who grew up in New York. No, I think he grew up on the West Coast. I'm getting him mixed up with another guy. But he sort of rose to power in this sort of nanotech company, and would have been like an executive level, like super rich tech billionaire. But in this sort of new system, as a neo-Victorian, he's an equity lord. So he has the sort of a title of duke, which is like one of the highest you can get. And he sort of is high up in the political structure of this new file, this neo-Victorian society. But essentially it's still based on his money and his economic value. And he goes to an engineer, this guy, John Percival Hackworth. I think his name Hackworth is like hacker. He asks John to create for him a primer, a book, an educational book for Lord Finkel McGraw's granddaughter, Elizabeth. Now, Lord Alexander is of the belief that his generation, the sort of the first of the Neo-Victorians, have managed to make this Neo-Victorian, this new also called New Atlantean, because their cities are sort of called Atlantis. Like, for example, the one, it's built off the coast of an artificial island off the coast of Shanghai, so it's called Shanghai Atlantis. There's one off the coast of Vancouver that's called Vancouver Atlantis. So they're also called New Atlantean. But his generation has been very successful because they are acting in rejection of the previous society, their sort of parents and grandparents society, who they've seen as having sort of no morals or loose morals, being amoral, sort of everything goes. I won't get into it too much, but it's kind of the same as how the actual Victorians were reacting to their Georgian forefathers. But he's worried that subsequent generations, including his granddaughters who are growing up in this Neo-Victorian world, will rebel against his generation, and the sort of this neo-Victorian experiment will peter out in a couple generations. So he wants this primer, this book, to help educate his granddaughter and help raise her in an unconventional way, the same way that he was raised in an unconventional way, sort of a subversive, nonconformist, unorthodox way. And he thinks this will give her sort of the head start and help her in society. So he gives this task to this engineer and gives him all the resources he needs and everything. And this engineer is brilliant. He sort of delegates the task to a whole bunch of people, and in the end he comes up with this book, this young lady's illustrated primer, which is part Wikipedia, part Google, and part ChatGPT all in one. So that's why we reread this book, because the rise of AI technology and ChatGPT and stuff really was not thought of at all back in 95. I mean, Google was not a thing. Wikipedia was not a thing in 1995 when this book was written. But this young lady's illustrated primer is kind of all of those things. It has search functions, encyclopedia functions, but most importantly, it has AI in that it reacts to and changes based on the input that the girl reading it is putting into it, and also it can sort of detect and sense this girl's surroundings and change based on those as well. So Hackworth, the engineer, he also has a daughter named Fiona, and he wants his daughter to have this same advantage that this lord's granddaughter is going to have. And so he secretly steals a copy of the instructions for the matter compiler to compile this book, takes it to the black market and gets them to create a book for him. Now, this is a mistake because, first of all, he's stealing this intellectual property that belongs to this Lord Finkel McGraw, but also he's letting the black market know that such a thing exists. So the black market sends some goons on him, and these kid thugs sort of beat him up, mug him, and take the book. But they don't recognize the value of the book. So the boy that takes it, this guy Harv, takes it to his little sister. He's got like a 5-year-old sister named Nell, and gives it to her. Now Harv and Nell, they are growing up in extreme poverty. They have a mother who has a new boyfriend just about every week, and some of them are extremely abusive to both Nell and Harv in different ways. And they basically have experienced the worst that children can experience growing up. Except hunger. They don't have to worry about hunger because the matter compilers will produce free food for people. That's one thing in this society. Everyone has their basic needs met. But Nell and Harv, they don't belong to a certain file. They're not part of the New Atlanteans, certainly not higher class files. They're called Theets. They're sort of on their own. They're without sort of a group. Anyway, so Harv has stolen this book and gives it to Nell, who, once she starts reading it, it sort of imprints on her, and it becomes sort of her book. And this book carries with her throughout the next 10 years of her life over the course of this story. And it starts out like a storybook, and it reads to her, which we'll get to in a second, but it reads a story to her and sort of teaches her how to read, how to write, how to do math, how to defend herself. So as the story goes on, her life is in danger from these sort of boyfriends that her mother has, and so it sort of teaches her basic martial arts and as much as you can teach a 5 or 6-year-old. And eventually her and her brother Harv flee from their home and have to get out because they are in a bad situation. So I said the book sort of reads itself to her. So this is a funny thing. So in this world, it's sort of seen that a computer cannot fully generate a human voice. It could generate a human voice, but it wouldn't feel real, and it would be kind of robotic and stilty, like I think early text-to-speech. And so in this society, there are people called ractors or interactors. They just call them ractors. They're sort of the actors and actresses of this world. So they have embedded in them a whole bunch of sights. Think of like a motion capture person when they have all these white dots all over their body. These actors and actresses have those implanted in them. They go into these booths that can then detect where all of these sights are and where they're moving, and projects that and their voice, because they also have sights inside their vocal cords, into a sort of augmented reality or virtual reality play, skit, movie, video game, whatever the customer is enjoying. And so for these books, these Young Ladies Illustrated Primer, they have hired out the very best of the best ractors to narrate these. And so that we get the perspective of this one narrator, this one ractor named Miranda, who sort of through the course of the book becomes a surrogate mother for Nell. She's reading the story to Nell, but she's also getting to know Nell through just reading this. And she had been a governess before she became a ractor, so she enjoyed working with children. But she really gets emotionally invested in this girl Nell, and she could tell like Nell's in a really abusive like situation and wants to help her out and wants to actually find this girl, but there's no way to actually find her because of the like trying to backtrace this link through the internet is kind of impossible. But she stays with her and sort of acts as a surrogate mother, like I said. So poor Hackworth, the engineer who created this book and tried to make an extra copy for his daughter, he was mugged and it was stolen. So he starts to get into trouble. So the black market people track him down, including a certain Judge Fang, who he's the guy who's from New York but lives on this coastal republic which is not part of the New Atlantean. Like I said, there's no nation states, but sort of the coastal republic along the coast of Shanghai. So he works for them, but he's like a Confucian, and there's a lot of Confucian philosophy in terms of how he sort of metes out justice. But he contacts Hackworth and gets him in contact with the black market guys, Dr. X, the guy who made the black market copy of the book that Neal has. And turns out Dr. X works for not the Coastal Republic, not the Neo-Victorian Atlantis city, but the Celestial Kingdom, or it's called the Middle Kingdom. I'm not entirely sure, but he works for basically China, actual China. And he has been not smuggling, but collecting a whole bunch of little girls. So there's lots of famine in the interior of China, and a lot of young girls and babies would have starved, but they've been sort of smuggled to the coast and brought to Shanghai, where Dr. X has been trying to not raise them or look after them, but kind of run an orphanage. But there are 250,000 of these little girls, and he has them on these massive cargo ships where each has 50,000 of these girls, and they're looked after by these nurses and maids and whatnot. But he comes to Hackworth and he's like, your book, I need that book. Like, if I can get that book and make hundreds of thousands of copies of that and give it out to all these little girls, then with Confucian philosophy, giving knowledge to someone so that they can better themselves is like the highest ideal, or whatever. I know I'm simplifying it, but he's like, we need to get this book out to these girls. And then the Neo-Victorians, Finkel McGraw, he finds out that what happened to Hackworth and how he tried to steal a copy of it, and so he sort of lets him give it out to the Dr. X and the Chinese as sort of but he wants them to become a double agent and to be passing information between the two of them. So in the end, these 250,000 little girls all get a copy of the primer, but they get the one with the sort of the basic computerized voice. They don't actually pay for actors to do it. And it's also changed into Chinese. Obviously, it has like sort of Han cultural folklore and whatnot added to it, so it's not Neo-Victorian. But Fiona, Hackworth's daughter, finally does get a copy. Elizabeth gets her copy. So Dr. X then sends Hackworth off on a sort of a mission for him, and of course his Neo-Victorians are like, yeah, go along with it, whatever it is, we'll back you up, just keep us updated as to what he's up to, this Dr. X. So he ends up going to Vancouver, and this is when it gets weird, and he encounters this woman. He's sort of following a trail that Dr. X left for him, and he comes across this woman who's like completely naked, lots of nudity and sexuality in the second half. And he follows her into this sort of underwater tunnel system that leads to this central chamber where exist these people called the Drummers. So this is sort of a secret hidden file, the Drummers. And he witnesses a very strange orgy where this woman is copulates with or is copulated by multiple men, and then her body sort of spontaneously combusts. And Hackworth is like, what's going on? And then he sort of passes out or something, and we don't hear from him for quite a while. Meanwhile, Neal and Harv, like I said, have fled their family. They meet up with this other file that are a bunch of craftsmen that create stuff by hand for Neo-Victorians, and which gets her Neal in contact with the Neo-Victorians, and they find out that she has this book, and they decide to let her keep it, sort of as like not a social experiment, but a psychological experiment to see if a girl with little to no education and in the background that she has, if with this book she can sort of become as successful and as educated as someone like Elizabeth Finkel McGraw, who's the daughter of a duke and has her whole life set up for her. But Harv, because he's like a member of a gang, he's not allowed to stay, so he willingly leaves and goes back into the city, where he sort of develops an asthma from breathing in all of these mites, these nanoparticles, nanomachines, and he eventually gets sick, and I think he dies. It's not explicitly stated. There is one scene where there's a funeral for him, but not really him. It's the him in the book, because the book, Princess Nell's, or Nell's book, the character in the book is Princess Nell, which is sort of herself, but in the story. So she has a funeral for fake Harv. So I don't know if that's just her or like symbolically cutting off Harv from her life, or if he actually died. Doesn't matter. Anyway, so she sort of grows up in the neo-Victorian city. She grows up alongside Fiona and Elizabeth, and it sort of talks about how the three of them are different, and how Elizabeth, who has grown up with everything, sort of expects everything, and gets upset when she doesn't get her way. And like there's one part where her parents take the book away from her, and she sort of has a freak out, like any 12-year-old girl would if you take away her cell phone, if she's had a cell phone since she was 5 years old. Which, again, this was written in 1995, so it's weird that sort of thing was anticipated. Fiona's a weird one. So she sort of lives in sort of a magical world of her own, where she wants to believe in more things than actually exist. But the weird thing is that over the course of 10 years, she hasn't heard from her father, but she loves her father dearly, and she still feels connected to him, even though her mother gets a divorce, which is a huge thing in near-Victorian society. Gets a divorce, and again, doesn't see her father for 10 years. But it turns out that, much like Miranda is the Ractor for Nell in her book, somehow Fiona's Ractor is her father, John Percival Hackworth. And it turns out, and we only find this out near the end of the book, it starts to make sense that, and entering this bizarre sex cult that Hackworth has unintentionally joined, these nanomachines, these mites, have gone into his bloodstream because they are exchanged through bodily fluids, so hence the sex, which, why couldn't you just make it so they're airborne? Anyways, so that's why they're constantly in an orgy, and has embedded itself in his neurons in his brain, and it's reading and writing on his neurons, but it's also transmitting with the other nanoreceptors. So all these nano machines in his head are reading his thoughts and computing things, and then through sex are being exchanged with others, which then they talk to each other. And it's basically this one big huge hive mind / computational net of people. And that's what the heat, remember that woman that spontaneously combusted, or girl, I think she was quite young. Anyways, that's what the heat is from, the computational power inside these people's brains and bodies. And so these drummers are this weird hive mind that's used to sort of crack codes. Now, when I say codes, I mean, like, think of someone's Bitcoin wallet, how it's like impossible to hack into a Bitcoin wallet. Well, with anything that's in terms of hacking, if you throw enough computational power at it, you can hack into it. Now, encryption technology advances at the same rate as decryption and hacking technology, so there'll always be a gap, and they'll always stay ahead, unless we have something like the drummers, which are this sort of hive mind of all connected people that they're sort of semi-conscious or unconscious this whole time, because most of their brain power is being taken up by these computations, and so they're able to actually hack into this system. So this whole global economic system that's based on monetary and financial transfers that are unhackable is now at risk because of these drummers. And if that's not enough, we have Dr. X, who does not like the hold that the neo-Victorians have over the world. So it's sort of a neo-colonialism, where the neo-Victorians have the feeds and have the matter compilers, and they're the ones controlling all this. And so in order to create food, infrastructure, anything like that, everyone relies on these neo-Victorians, and a few other major files as well, but they're sort of the main one. And so Dr. X wants to create something new, something Eastern. So all of this technology is very much Western technology. He wants to create something Eastern for China, for the Han people. And his idea is this thing called a seed. So these seeds, because he believes that in China, they believe very much so in farming and in planting and in growing. So these seeds, which would be kind of like matter compilers, in that these seeds would contain all the energy, the materials, and the instructions to, much like a seed does, like an acorn contains everything needed to start growing an oak tree. These seeds would contain everything to grow whatever you want, buildings, vehicles, food, anything at all. So instead of relying on these massive pipe feeds that come from the source, the Victorian sources, like capital S sources, source of matter, they'll have these seeds where they can sort of plant wherever they want, whatever they want, and grow whatever they want. So it's east versus west, but it's also sort of a hierarchical, structured society versus a more anarchical, free society. And Dr. X, upon meeting Hackworth and creating this black market copy of the primer for him, sees in Hackworth the potential for a mind that can solve this problem of creating the seed. So we, of course, again using nanites, he infects Hackworth with this idea. He sort of implants a seed of his own in Hackworth's brain to sort of come up with this technology, and sends him to the drummers, where over the course of 10 years he is unconsciously using the drummer network of hive mind of brains all interlinked to solve the technological problem of the seed and sort of create this technology. And so now, around the time that she's 16, she decides to go out on her own and leave Victorian society. It's not a loose end, but Elizabeth and Fiona sort of, we don't hear much about them. When Fiona's father comes back, she joins up with him for a bit, but then she decides that she's going to become a ractor or an actor. So she sort of gives up on Neo-Victorian society. Elizabeth rebels and joins this secret society called Cryptnet, which is sort of an underground society of cryptographers or something. Doesn't matter. But Elizabeth decides she's going to go out on her own. She goes out and goes to sort of a brothel, but instead of becoming one of the performers, she wants to be a writer. She says she wants to, because she's read all these stories from her primer, she wants to be someone who can write or stories or whatever. So through the course of this book, we also get the actual text of these stories that Nell's reading, starting with when she's very young and moving up to when she's older. And for example, one of them is teaching her all about Turing machines and about computers, and teaching her how to program, which is very cool. So not just that, but like I said, the martial arts, like she's learned everything you could possibly learn from this book. And at one point she sort of undergoes a Turing test through the primer, where she's communicating with someone who claims to be human, but in the end she determines that it's actually a machine, because the reason is the person can't respond to, interact with, or create poetry, which I think is really interesting, because nowadays ChatGPT can do that. It can create poetry. Now, I'm not going to get into the whole argument of is it actually poetry, but I mean, it has no soul behind it, so it doesn't have, same with AI art and whatnot, but it doesn't have the soul, the human creativity behind it. So I think it has no value because of that. But in terms of a Turing test, I think there's a case to be said that for right now, the stuff that AI can create, I think you could do sort of double-blind tests with people, and people would not be able to tell the difference between AI-made art and poetry and literature and human-made. I think we are at that point now. Now, am I saying that, oh, wow, AI's passed the Turing test? No, I think we're just moving the goalposts for what the Turing test is. Or I think the Turing test is not relevant anymore. What we thought AI would need to be sentient is no longer what. The more that we know about AI, the less we believe that it's actually alive. But at the end of the day, what is alive in consciousness? We think we're special, but we're just biological machines. We are built very differently than a traditional binary computer system. But I don't know, at the end of the day, if you can't tell the difference between human output and machine output, then what does it really matter? Anyways, those are just some of the things that I've been thinking about. That's why I wanted to reread this book. But I'll get to the end of the story. Nell, in her storybook, in her form as Princess Nell, meets these people called these mice who there's like thousands and thousands of these mice who sort of swear allegiance to Princess Nell, and she's like, what? Why are these mice believing me to be their princess? Whatever. But she thinks it's just part of the story, so whatever. She goes along with it. Hackworth manages to wake up from his weird sex orgy thing where he's coming up with the seed, because the Neo-Victorians have sort of found him and sent these hunter-killer nanites in to sort of wipe the ones out in his brain. So he actually comes back to consciousness, gets back to Shanghai, gets his daughter, meets his wife, and has his wife's obviously moved on because she knows what he's been up to. And Hackworth meets with Dr. X, and Dr. X explains this whole thing to him and says, like, you got to give us the seed technology. Hackworth reveals that he's not going to give it to them, but he's almost cracked it, or he has cracked it, but it's something to do with when he created the primers. And because he's been a reactor for his daughter's primer, even though he's been sort of unconscious, semi-conscious in this sex orgy drummer thing the whole time, he's still somehow, the primers are also connected to the seed technology. And Nell, as she nears the end of her primer at age 16, she sort of comes across this seed technology, or she should have has the seed technology now. Sort of the final boss of her book is Hackworth, and he sort of gives her the keys, which represents this technology, the seed technology that she now has. So it's been developed over 10 years, but it's still through the primers that people have access to this. And it's sort of a trial where, in order to get this technology, you need to have gone through the education of the primers to prove that you are worthy of it. That's my take on it. We then have some political upsets. So there's a peasant uprising in China, much like the Boxer Rebellion, that is moving to the coast and moving to Shanghai. Is going to push out all the barbarians from the coastal republics and sort of take back China. Nell gets caught up in this. She gets captured because of the place she's living at. The people there in the coastal republic, the Han Chinese, they quickly defect because they say the wind's blowing, and they tie her up. And then she's raped a few times, which is awful. But who comes to the rescue but the Mouse Army? So it turns out the Mouse Army in the story was these 250,000 girls who had also grown up on the primer, and they sort of see Nell as their princess. She's the one with the first primer, and so Nell has now an army of 12 to 15-year-old girls, 250,000 strong. And so with them, she's able to sort of break free. And at the end of the book, she's looking for her mother. And by her mother, she means Miranda. Now, Miranda, who had been her rector, got caught up in drummer society. So she's had people come to her and be like, hey, you want to find out where Nell is? Like, we know it's impossible to sort of crack the code and backtrace where this Nell person is that you've been reading to, but with this drummer hive mind computer technology, we can solve that. So the very end scene of the book is everyone's naked for whatever reason. So all the people that have been pushed to the coast by this sort of peasant army coming, they all strip naked and go underwater into the ocean, and there's a drummer society there. And inside is another crazy sex orgy, but Miranda is among them. And she is about to undergo that ritual that we saw earlier with Hackworth, where she will be inseminated by multiple men and then spontaneously combust from all of the waste heat from the computer reactions. But Nell runs up and manages to kiss her fiercely on the mouth, which exchanges bodily fluids, and gives Miranda these hunter-killer nanites that Nell has created that destroyed the ones in her brain. So when Nell was raped, she was infected with the drummer nanites, but she created these counter nanites to destroy them, and then of course it's all weirdly sexual. She fiercely kisses her surrogate mother, freeing her from the drummers, and then they all escape. And that's how it ends. It ends very abruptly, but it seems like Princess Nell, she is recognized by Queen Victoria II as a fellow monarch, so she sort of created this new file where her coat of arms is talked about, where it's like a book with 2 keys and a seed. So Nell has this seed technology that's sort of counter-revolutionary, or I guess revolutionary, counter to the hierarchy of Victorian society. Yeah, so Stephenson's books are kind of hard to follow for someone who's like me, who's not super smart, but I enjoy it because I can't fully understand all of it, but I understand enough of it to know that there is substance there and there is a lot to take apart and dissect. Like I said, so themes of East versus West, hierarchy versus anarchy, or authoritarianism versus anarchy, rich versus poor, class, social issues. There's so much packed in this book. It's not that big of a book, 500 pages, in this trade paperback, but it is really enjoyable. And like I said, the idea that people will be educated in the future by these sort of these primers. I mean, in this, it's sort of a book that each page is like computerized and has lots of technology in it. But you just imagine an iPad. I know it's kind of weird to give all bunch of kids iPads, but you can sort of imagine a dystopian future 25 years from now where classrooms are just that. The teacher is more of a technical administrator or even just a babysitter, and kids all sit in a room and have their iPads in front of them, and AI will sort of give them what they need. I mean, it's the ultimate form of individualized education where every student will get exactly what they need, and based on their inputs, the AI can detect where they're at and provide them with evaluations and lessons to aid them, which could be a really, really good thing, but also could be a very, very bad thing. I mean, I think the technology is, or at least the science is already there. The technology is also there as well. I think we would just need an entrepreneur to come along, and I'm sure there are already sort of educational apps out there, but ChatGPT and AI is so new right now, and LLMs are so new that I think we are there, but it just hasn't been developed yet. I can see in a couple of years this sort of thing being created and trials being run. They could conceivably even be run from home, where people just, I mean, if we had AI right now, the sort of technological level of AI right now that back in 2020 when the pandemic happened, I could see this sort of being heavily implemented for sort of stay-at-home learning. But that's the thing with education, is that parents need to work these days. You need two parents to both to work to be able to run a household financially. So they need to put the kids somewhere. So I think there'll always be brick schools. Even if it is just a place to babysit kids while they sit on their iPads on their young ladies illustrated primers and learn. But yeah, just made me think a lot about education, even though this is a 30-year-old book. A lot of the predictions, especially about even the stuff about the technology or the financial technology and like blockchain and whatnot, which is not the exact same, but I mean, you could read this and believe it was written in 2025. So much of the technologies in it feel familiar, which is very, very strange. And also, it's a really interesting world. Like I said, cyberpunk, but it's not cyberpunk. But if I say cyberpunk, that can give you an idea of what it's like. I really like it. I'm not going to say it's my favorite Stephenson novel. Anathem might be my favorite, but this might be, I don't know. Stevenson's pretty good. I've only read 3 of his books, Snow Crash being the other one. Yeah, that was The Diamond Age by Neal Stephenson. Highly recommend you give it a try if you care at all about AI or especially about education.